Welcome back to another episode of Let's Make Dinner. So for this one, I'm just starting by crumpling up my parchment paper. It just helps it lay flatter. I don't remember where I learned that, probably like TikTok or Instagram. And then I'm going in with some garlic bread. I picked these up at the dollar store, so there are only 6 in here instead of the typical 8. And we are just making some garlic bread pizzas. I love to do this when I just have some leftover sauce, so I'm going over each piece with a little bit of marinara, and then I do have a bag of frozen, or was frozen and I thawed it, of just leftover marinara sauce mixed with ground beef from a previous dinner another time that we just didn't finish, threw it in the freezer, and now we're just going to repurpose that. It's also one of my favorite ways just to bump up the protein and kind of like do a shortcut for a ragu pasta sauce is I just saute up some ground beef before adding in whatever jarred pasta sauce that I want. And then of course, you can serve that over spaghetti, but in this case, I just put it on the garlic bread pizzas. And now we're just going over with some classic pizza cheese. And then the final thing is to top it with some pepperoni slices. You can, of course, just omit the ground beef, but I think it gives it a little more texture, flavor, and of course bumps up that protein. And then, yeah, it's just so simple, so easy, and so delicious. Another variation of this meal that I like to do is also to get like a large French bread loaf from the grocery store, cut it down the middle, and then make like 2 giant French bread pizzas. That's also a really good way. And then here we are just making a salad to go alongside of it. Pizza salad, classic combination. I had butter lettuce that I am using for another meal that'll be featured in this video. Typically we usually have like green leaf or romaine for salads, but the butter lettuce worked just fine. And then I'm going in with some little cherry tomatoes. I just like those a little bit smaller when I'm eating my salad, but I could legit just eat a whole pint of cherry tomatoes. They are one of my favorites. And then going in with some croutons. I'm not a huge crouton fan, but my husband is, so I always throw those in. And then some shredded cheese and just a little bit of ranch. I'm using the Lighthouse Ranch. It's one of our favorites around here. Also, Caesar is also a close second. But yeah, just a little simple salad for the side. Here's what the pizzas look like. Aren't they adorable? They're so cute. So I'm just giving them a quick chop and then gonna plate those up and also make a plate for my toddler. Later in the week, I actually found another bag of that garlic bread. And had I had found it sooner, I would have made all 12 pieces at once. Because this is a really good make ahead meal. You can either not cook it and just leave it as is, pop them in the freezer, and then cook them all when you're ready to eat, or you can actually fully make them, cool them down, and then pop them in the freezer, and then you have like a super quick dinner that's already done. So easy, so delicious. Pizza is a really common meal around here. It's one of my husband's favorite meals, so any kind of variation of pizza, we're gonna eat it. This next meal is a Hawaiian veggie chicken. I'm sure there's a better name than that, but that's what we call it. And I actually doubled this recipe. So I purposely knew that because we love it so much, so I knew that I wanted to make one for dinner that night, and then I also wanted to have one prepped in the freezer. So I'm doing half of each of these peppers onto my baking sheet, and then the other half of each of these peppers I'm going to be adding to a Ziploc bag to have in the freezer along with the rest of the ingredients. In addition to the peppers, we're also doing a red onion. Now, I am not a huge onion fan. Like, I'll do some sauteed onion like in a recipe, but something like a red onion is just not my go-to. But I will say, if you're like me and you're not a huge onion fan, it just all becomes so delicious in the sauce that you end up pouring over this meal that it doesn't matter what the vegetable is, you're gonna eat it. I trust me. And now we're just working on the sauce. So this meal does come with canned pineapple. So I'm dumping out some of the juice, and then I'm dumping in 1 full can along with those other vegetables into my freezer prep. And then I'm also doing the same thing, but then of course adding it to the baking sheet for the meal that we're eating for dinner. So when it comes to a meal like this, the most that it requires is just chopping the vegetables. So to me, it makes the most sense to double it. So that way I'm already spending the time chopping vegetables initially. And so then that way everything just gets chopped and ready. And then it saves me time for the next meal. Broccoli is not part of the original recipe, but we just like broccoli over in this house, so I do like to throw in a bag of broccoli in there. I didn't add it to the freezer one because I always just use regular freezer bag of broccoli anyways. And then of course the most important step besides the sauce is going to be the chicken. So I'm just giving this a nice rough chop. I do try to make them pretty equal-ish in size and small, so I don't have to worry about once it's cooked going back in and chopping up all these giant pieces of chicken. So I try to make them somewhat bite-sized just for the ease of serving. Now I'm splitting up the pineapple juice and then making the sauce according to the directions. I will link the recipe that I go off of down below, but of course, like most things, we always measure with our heart. So we start with pineapple juice, soy sauce, ginger. I'm going in with some garlic. Then we're going to go in with some red pepper flakes. If you like things spicier, definitely add more. I'm not a spicy fan, so I add less. And then some brown sugar, just for even more added sweetness on top of the pineapple juice. The final part of the sauce is adding in some cornstarch, and this just helps it thicken up as it's cooking in the oven and make it like a really nice glaze type texture. Yes, there are lumps left over. I've never had problems with it. I don't have a whisk currently. I need to just get a whisk, so that's as good as I got it with the fork without putting it in like a blender. And I've had yet to find any issues with the cornstarch. It all just kind of blends and melts together. And I clearly have a toddler because she was just screaming in the background of this video. And then I'm doing the same thing, but making it now to dump into my freezer meal. So same concept, all of those delicious ingredients, and then adding in the cornstarch. I was debating if I wanted to add in the cornstarch now or if I wanted to add in the cornstarch like when I actually made it. So I don't think it made a difference one way or the other, honestly. The only thing I did not add to this nice freezer prep was the chicken. I just decided to save the chicken and I would add it at the time of cooking because most of my meat is frozen anyways, so I didn't want to thaw it and then refreeze it. But here's what it looks like when I tell you that this is one of our favorite meals. It is one of our favorite meals. Serve it over some rice. I do like to add a little drizzle of a teriyaki sauce. We always have these little leftover terry sauces from Mobetta's, but any sort of teriyaki sauce that you have is a great one. For this meal, I just thought since it's been so hot, because it is summer and we are in a desert climate where it gets to be like 110, delightful. I thought some chicken bacon ranch wraps sounded really good, a nice cold meal. So I'm just placing some butter lettuce in some tortilla wraps, and then we have the bacon that was actually left over from my Let's Make Breakfast video. So I do love to just try to use up everything, everything that I buy that we try to use up. There's always going to be some food waste, but if we can minimize that, I think that's a great budgeting tip, honestly. And then I kept mine just simple. I just added only ranch, and then for my husband's I added ranch, and then he also got some Frank's buffalo sauce just because he likes things spicy and I do not. And then we're going in, of course, with some tomatoes and then bacon, because that's what makes it so delicious, is that bacon ranch combo. It makes me think of those like Subway sandwiches, the chicken bacon ranch. Oh man, I used to live off of those when I was younger. And then final step, of course, cheese. We already know how I feel about cheese. Cheese is life. So and then to wrap these, I just wrap these like a regular burrito. So you just tuck in the sides and then give it a nice tuck and roll. And then you could either leave them as is or you can cut them in half depending on how you just wish to present them. But either way, they're going to be delicious. So same thing here, just tucking in the sides and giving that a nice tight roll. So I did end up cutting them in half. We served them alongside some chips. And then there is my toddler's version, which is just like a deconstructed chicken bacon. For this next meal, we are starting with some mushrooms. I'm making some chicken lettuce wraps, kind of like Asian inspired. That was the purpose of the butter lettuce. I got the butter lettuce for this recipe, and then I just used it where I could in other recipes for the week. So my mushrooms were on the verge of not being very good anymore, so I did have to cut off some pieces of them that I felt were too icky. But to a nice large pot, I did just melt down some butter, and then we're just gonna add those mushrooms in. I never know, or like from the movie, like the Julie and Julia movie, which is one of my favorites. She does talk about how Julia Child says you're supposed to not crowd the pan with mushrooms. I always crowd the pan with mushrooms, so I guess me and Julia Childs want to be friends. But now I'm just going in and I'm just chopping up chicken. I do want to make these pieces pretty small because they are going into just a lettuce wrap. So definitely don't want like to have a giant bite of chicken, at least to the best of my ability. Once the mushrooms have finished cooking down, I am just going to take those out of the pan just to make a nice empty surface to get a nice browning on the chicken before throwing the mushrooms back in. I will say whenever I do make mushrooms like this, I have the hardest time just not eating this entire bowl while I'm making dinner because I love mushrooms that much. I know they're not for everybody, but they are a favorite of mine. And then of course we're just going to season the chicken. I did some pepper. I did some garlic, ginger, salt, all that good stuff. Red pepper flakes. Again, not too much, but just enough to give it just a little something. Once the chicken's cooked, I'm just going to use a spoon to make a little hole in the center and add in some garlic and let that cook for just a minute. And then, of course, we're going to add those mushrooms back into the pan as well and give everyone a nice little stir. Now we're going in with some soy sauce, so I'm just going to put that in my little tablespoon. I was trying to not get it too saucy. I also added in like a scant tablespoon of hoisin sauce. I was a little nervous. I've never used hoisin sauce before, so I was like unsure of it. And then of course some brown sugar just for some extra sweetness. I was trying not to make it too saucy, and then I did end up, once we served it, so I put it in those butter lettuce wraps, served it with some edamame, some broccoli on the side. I chopped up some green onions just for some extra crunch and color, and then of course you can just top that with a little, extra soy sauce or teriyaki sauce. Now this dinner is going to be, if you're going to make any of the meals, I would say the Hawaiian chicken or this one. It was so good, let me tell you. So we're starting in a nice hot pot, adding in some garlic, some sun-dried tomatoes. When I tell you how good this smells, oh my gosh. I've got some water boiling in the back there, and I just added in some pasta. So I did the bow tie noodles to my pan of garlic and sun-dried tomatoes. I also added in a jar of Alfredo sauce. Yes, you can make your own Alfredo sauce, and you're welcome to do so. But I took the shortcut this day, so, and then that's why I add the garlic and the sun-dried tomatoes, just to kind of elevate that a little bit, and then we're just going to give that a nice little stir, let it all get warm while the noodles cook. Once the noodles are cooked, get those strained, throw them back in the pot, add in some shredded Italian cheese variety, and then give that another toss for, oh my gosh, this is such like a rich, delicious pasta. Was so good. And then what is pasta without some steak? My lovely husband filmed these portions for me, since he was the one going outside in the heat and standing next to the hot grill to make this delicious steak. We chopped up the steak, threw it back in the pot with the pasta, and oh my gosh, served that with a little garlic toast. I added, of course, a little veggie on the side. So good. 10 out of 10 for this one. Anyways, I hope this inspires you to make something delicious, and thanks so much for watching.